Good morning. Everybody's very well behaved. Thank you. Thank you for joining us today. Before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge some of the dignitaries in the room here today. And so, like the Oscars, please hold your applause until the end. First, I'd like to thank our host, NYU, represented here by Lynn Brown, Senior Vice President. I'd also like to acknowledge elected officials, Congressman Jerry Nadler, Senator Brad Hoylman, Assemblymember Felix Ortiz, Assemblymember Christine Pellegrino. I'd also like to acknowledge brothers and sisters from organized labor. I'd also like to recognize colleagues from the administration, Alicia Barton, President and CEO of the New York State Energy and Research Development Authority, Commissioner Rose Harvey, New York State Department of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation, John Rhodes, Chair of the Public Service Commission, Commissioner Basil Segos, New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, and Gil Quinones, President and CEO of the New York Power Authority. And from the environmental community, Cecil Corbin Mark, We Act, Lisa Dix, the Sierra Club, Paul Gallet, Riverkeeper, Corinna Gore, Center for Earth Ethics, Kit Kennedy and her colleagues from NRDC, Catherine Heinz, New York City Audubon, Kevin McDonald, the Nature Conservancy, Paul Mankiewicz, the Gaia Institute, Joe Martens, New York Offshore Wind Alliance, Patrick McClellan, New York League of Conservation Voters, Laura Skinner, Worker Institute at Cornell's ILR School, Julia Walsh, FRAC Action, and all of the other great advocates who are here today from around the state. So thank you all. So, Governor Cuomo called me right after Superstorm Sandy. At that time, I was working for the U.S. Department of Energy in Washington. The governor had spent many days and nights with cold and miserable New Yorkers in the dark. He was at the front line at Sandy, just as he was during Hurricanes Irene and Lee. He saw that climate change was real and it hurt people from across the state. He asked me to return to New York to be his energy czar to help him build a new energy system. The governor recognized that we were on an unsustainable path. We needed to build a new energy system that was cleaner, more resilient, and more equitable. And the governor also understood that there were economic development and good jobs that would come from a transition to a clean energy future. Thanks to the governor, New York State is now a leader in renewable energy, and through the governor's Reforming the Energy Vision, or REV, we lead the world in policy innovation to build the next generation grid. And today, New York State has over 150,000 clean energy jobs, one of the fastest growing sectors in the economy. So we're here this morning to talk about what we're doing to move forward on achieving our future energy vision. But we're facing obstacles far greater than we could have ever imagined. So we must start with what the Trump administration is proposing to put in our way. On January 5th, Interior Secretary Ryan Zinke unveiled the National Outer Continental Shelf Oil and Gas Program. The program proposes to make more than 90% of the total offshore acreage in the United States available to oil and gas drilling, and 92 million acres of the North Atlantic available for fossil fuel exploration, putting 1,700 miles of New York's coast in harm's way. The federal plan puts polluters first, and virtually all federal waters off coastal states, including New York, at risk. Oil and gas exploration was done in waters adjacent to New York in the 1970s and 80s, which estimated that there may be as much as 1.8 billion barrels of oil and 11 trillion cubic feet of natural gas. This makes New York a major target with the potential to devastate our coastal economies and cause irreparable harm to the environment. The federal plan poses a triple threat to the health and safety of New Yorkers: exploration, drilling, and the potential for catastrophic spill. Let's talk about exploration. As the federal government attempts to determine where gas and oil reserves exist, there will be substantial localized impacts. Before drilling can begin, the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management allows initial survey work to take place, which would be devastating for New York's ocean environment. Sound waves are produced by air guns, which send destructive shock waves into sediment and are strong enough to penetrate 6 miles into the ocean floor. Continuous noise from a seismic survey can blanket an area thousands of square miles for weeks or months at a time. Air guns depress catch rates of commercial species by 40–80%. Air guns make it impossible for species like whales to communicate, feed, or find mates. Air guns disrupt migratory range for endangered whales and sea turtles. Air guns lead to long-term loss of marine mammal biodiversity. Now let's talk about drilling. These offshore rigs can dump contaminants, including lead, chromium, mercury, and benzene, into our waters. Once commercially viable reserves are determined, an oil platform may be fixed to the ocean floor, may float, or may consist of an artificial island. And the infrastructure that accompanies offshore drilling, including thousands of feet of pipelines and refineries, blights the coast and deters tourism. Production platforms present further risk based on the potential for spills and ruptures. Let's talk about spills. A potential spill could carry into the New York Harbor, spread into the Hudson, and affect all areas of the South Shore. Let's look at what would happen if a spill happened during a storm. Here's the spill at hour 1. And then during a hurricane, what happens with a different surge? And by the way, hurricanes and oil spills go together. During Katrina and Rita, there were dozens of oil spills that happened during those hurricanes. You can see at 4 feet, at 10 feet, it's devastating. A spill would cripple Long Island's booming $5.6 billion tourism industry and devastate New York's fishing industry, which generates over $180 million annually. A spill would also jeopardize the port of New York and New Jersey, the largest on the Atlantic coast, threatening 400,000 jobs in the national economy. The risk of an oil spill in New York waters is unacceptable. After a bipartisan outcry, Secretary Zinke immediately granted Florida an exemption from the offshore drilling program, citing Florida's reliance on tourism as an economic driver. So let's look. Number 3 in the nation for tourism, New York. Florida, number 2 in the nation for tourism. New York employs 320,000 people in tourism. Florida, 456,000. We generate $11 billion in wages. Florida, 12.7. Contributes $23 billion in GDP, $28 billion in GDP. What's the big difference between New York and Florida? Instead of protecting our waters from another BP-type oil spill, the federal plan raises the threat of another disaster. We must do everything we can to prevent offshore drilling in New York waters. Rather than fighting about offshore oil and gas, we'd like to work cooperatively with the Department of Interior to develop offshore wind. That's the path to the future, not to the past. Under Governor Cuomo's leadership, we've made substantial progress in developing a clean energy system. Now, I may be a czar, but Governor Cuomo is the power who gets things done. So, please join me in welcoming my boss, the 56th Governor of the state of New York, Andrew Cuomo.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much. Good morning. Thank you to NYU for this beautiful space and all this energy. Let's give NYU a round of applause. To Mr. Richard Kaufman, our Chairman of Energy and Finance, he has been a blessing for this administration. He's been in the federal government. He's been in the private sector. He has made New York the nation's leader in clean energy. Richard Kaufman, let's give him a round of applause. To our great Vice President Al Gore, let's give him a round of applause. I'm going to have more to say about the Vice President in a moment. To Corinna Gore, who's the director of the Center for Earth Ethics. Let's give her a round of applause. Corinna is following in her father's footsteps. I can't imagine what that is like. Must be hard. Some people, but hard for me to imagine, hard for your father to imagine too, following in his father's footsteps, but you're really doing a great job. Let's give Corinna another round of applause. To the administration officials who are here, to my partners in the legislature who are here, nothing happens without the legislature. To the advocates who are here, keep pushing, keep pushing, keep pushing. We need you now more than ever, stronger and more vital than ever. So let's give them a round of applause. The Vice President and I worked together in the Clinton-Gore administration. He was the Gore in the Clinton-Gore administration. And I was at HUD. And the Vice President was very kind to me. He was a mentor to me. He was a little bit older than I was at that time. Somehow that has reversed, and I am now older than he is. I think it's public service in the state of New York that can do it to you. But he was a true friend, and we spent a lot of time together, both professionally and personally. And I tried to be a good friend to him. We would play basketball. I would let him win, but nicely. Shoot pool. I would let him win, but nicely. But he's been a tremendous influence in my public service and in my orientation and in my training. And I want to publicly thank him for that today. Vice President Al Gore. And service in Washington was tough. Washington was a tough town. Albany is also a tough town, different variation on the same theme. President Truman said in Washington, if you want a friend, get a dog. In Albany, I want you to know, I just got a dog. I did. His name is Captain. He's 4 months old. My daughters wanted a dog. It was very important. They wanted a dog, and they found the dog and a puppy, and he was so cute. And you know, when you get to my daughter's stage, you need an inducement to get them home. They're 22, they're 23. Coming home to spend time with the old man doesn't have that great charm to it. I used to get them to come home because they would need money. So they would call and I'd say, come home and I'll give you a check. Now they call and they say, I need money. And I say, oh, come home, I'll give you a check. And they say, that's okay, we'll take an electronic transfer. That'll be fine, Dad. But they came home for the dog. They were very excited for the first 24 hours, and then they were gone. So now it's just me and the dog, 4 months old. We're going through that great period of house training, house breaking. I read all the books. I think this dog has an undiagnosed bowel disorder. The dog cannot urinate or defecate if the temperature is under 68 degrees. So you can take him outside and stand for an hour and nothing. But you bring him inside in the warmth, right then. He also cannot urinate unless he has a rug under his feet. It's a very, and I'm working through these issues with him, but he's still a friend. The topic today is offshore drilling, and Richard Kaufman did a magnificent job. Talk about cleaning up a mess, which I've had plenty of practice in. Offshore drilling would do exactly that. Now, with 8 years with Al Gore and his proficiency in the environment and science, and we brought HUD as part of that constellation. We did sustainable development with EPA Director Carol Browner, who was there at that time, who was a vice president protege. I became very proficient in all the technical terms of the environment and the science because Vice President Gore is a very fastidious teacher and he wants you to use the right terms at all times. So when it comes to offshore drilling, we have to offer our comment today to the federal government on their rule on offshore drilling. And we're going to issue that comment today. And our comment to Secretary Zinke, my personal comment, is going to be that offshore drilling is a really, really dumb idea. That's my professional comment. First of all, it is the exact opposite direction that we should be headed as a nation. This administration, they have a glorified retrospective view of America. Let's make America great again. Let's go back to the good old days. Back to the good old days where we used fossil fuels. That's like saying, let's go back to the good old days when I was 21 years old and I smoked 2 packs of Camels before I developed lung cancer. You know, that is the sad analogy. Going backwards is literally going back to a time where we did tremendous damage to this planet, much of which is irreversible, and much of which we are now fighting today. Back to the good old days, like when? Like 1969, when you had a rig off the coast of Santa Barbara, which poured millions of barrels of oil in a drilling accident. Since then, in 1969, there have been 44 additional major oil spills, despite all the so-called advancements in technology. The worst was in 2010, when BP's Deepwater Horizon exploded and burst into flames, spewing 4.9 million gallons of crude into the Gulf of Mexico. Now, instead of protecting our waters from another oil spill, like the one that devastated the Gulf, this new federal plan only increases the chances of another disaster taking place. The entire environmental policy ignores all the lessons that we have learned. It ignores all the damage that we have done. And they still want to go back. They still want to go back to the good old days of the 50s and 60s. The 50s and 60s were not that good when it comes to the environment. Back in 1953, 200 people in New York City died because they were smothered from smog. Back to the good old days when Ohio's Cuyahoga River literally would burn from the pollution. Back to when we sprayed DDT on crops because we thought that was a smart, progressive idea. Back to when we were in a state of denial and a state of ignorance as to what we were actually doing to this planet. Now, I would love to say that I am shocked by this administration, that they would have a policy that would take us backwards. But frankly, it fits a much larger pattern and a disturbing pattern. They have a revisionist view of this nation's history. And you look at all the proposals that are coming out and all the ideas that are having after the Florida Parkland massacre. What's the answer to gun violence? Armed teachers. Great idea. And then when there's a shooting in a hospital, we'll arm all the doctors. And then when there's a shooting in a movie theater, we'll arm all the people who are watching movies. And soon we'll all be armed, and everyone will have a gun. And won't that be great? That's the NRA's vision of a safe America. Everyone has a gun, and the good guys can shoot it out with the bad guys. It's absurd. They hold 800,000 DACA young people hostage to his egotistical vision of building a wall between Mexico and the United States because he said he was going to do it in the campaign. And now he's going to hold 800,000 young people hostages until he gets his wall. We have a terrible situation with election hacking. Sounds like a science fiction movie. We know it's true. We know Russia was trying to corrupt our system, and 21 states. And we have an election in 8 months where they say they're going to do it again, and we're doing absolutely nothing to try to protect it. We've had revelations of a sexual harassment of women that is sickening and disgusting. And we have absolutely no answer from Washington. America, the land of religious freedom, they want to ban Muslims. They want to eliminate health care for 20 million Americans. They're playing a dangerous macho game with North Korea. They abandoned the people of Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria in what was a really terrible, terrible, despicable act. The people of Puerto Rico are American citizens, and we should never forget that, and they deserved better treatment than they got. They've been seeking to degrade the rights of the LGBTQ community, degrade the rights of women, degrade a woman's right to choose. They proposed a tax plan that gives a break to the richest 1% of Americans after promising that they were going to help the middle class. So there's a pattern. But I think in many ways their pattern on the environment is even worse because they are going backwards. And they're showing a total disregard for the science, the reality, and the history. Their actions defy everything we know. And look at the environmental policy. They are consistent with it. They started by leaving the Paris Accords. They repealed Obama's Clean Power Plan. They reversed a ban on drilling in the Arctic. They approved the Keystone Pipeline. They proposed cutting EPA's funding to the lowest level since 1990. They withdrew a rule regulating fracking in public lands. They have a plan to roll back the automotive fuel efficiency standards. They've rescinded President Obama's executive order banning offshore drilling. And now they would also roll back the safety regulations that were put in place after the Deepwater Horizon accident at the same moment that they're proposing additional offshore drilling. I mean, it would be funny if it wasn't so serious. So the question becomes, what do we do here in New York? We could pray, prayer works, hope for a miracle, or we could act. We could curse the darkness, or we can light a candle. Well, we're going to light a number of candles, and we're going to illuminate the path forward. Remember, New York State started the environmental back on Storm King Mountain, back on the Hudson River. That was the birth of the environmental movement. Remember, most socially progressive movements started here in the state of New York. Women's rights were born right here in New York State at Seneca Falls. That's where women's rights started. Workers' rights started right after the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire. Gay rights started at the sit-in at the Stonewall demonstration. Civil rights started in the state of New York when the NAACP was founded. So our legacy is following in our founding fathers' footsteps, is to restart an environmental movement, and let's show this nation the true path forward on the environment, and that's not what this administration is doing. New York is going to lead a counter movement to what this administration is doing on the environment. We've already started. They left the Paris Accords. We're starting our own alliance to follow the Paris Accords and exceed them. They're defunding the EPA. We just put $300 million, the largest amount in history, into our Environmental Protection Fund. We created the largest fund in the state's history, $2.5 billion to provide clean water. We banned fracking. We have the largest reconstruction of our state parks in history, over $1 billion. The largest acquisition of land for the Great Adirondack Park. That has been done in over 100 years. $1 billion to clean up brownfield sites. $150 million to clean up the Grumman Plume on Long Island that is now leaching into the drinking water. $65 million to get ahead of the harmful algal blooms that are happening all across the country with inaction across the board. But we're going to get ahead of them in New York. A $200 million plan to restore oysters and clams in the waters surrounding New York, a natural way to clean the water. And we're excited about that, the largest effort of its kind in the United States of America. And we have the most ambitious clean energy program in the country. While Washington wants to return to coal, the polluting energy of the past, New York has vowed to be coal-free by 2020. We have the most aggressive clean energy mandate in the United States of America, 50% renewable by 2030, setting the bar high for every other state. And across the state, we're making investments in renewable energy. We believe the future is a clean energy economy that produces clean energy and clean jobs, a whole new future for our brothers and sisters in the labor movement, a whole new future for the workers of tomorrow in clean energy, clean energy, clean energy. Get ahead of the market because that's where the world is going to go, and let New York lead the way. Today I'm proud to announce the next steps. The New York State Energy Research Development Authority, commonly known as NYSERDA, is awarding $1.4 billion for 26 large-scale renewable energy projects across the state, the single largest commitment to renewable energy by any state in the history of the nation. These are land-based wind and hydroelectric powers, 22 large-scale solar powers. These projects will create 3,000 good-paying jobs and spur $3 billion in private investment. You combine these projects, in combination, these projects will power more than 430,000 homes and reduce emissions equivalent to taking 340,000 cars off the road. In combination with this effort, we're also going to lead the nation with the most ambitious wind program in the country. By 2030, we will build 2.4 gigawatts of power from offshore wind, enough to power 1.2 million New York households. And today we announced 2 new procurements as a giant step forward towards that goal. We will procure 800 megawatts of offshore wind power located offshore of Long Island. These new offshore wind programs will create 5,000 clean energy jobs, a total of investment of $3 billion. So today, which is the last day for the comment on the federal rule on offshore drilling, you heard my personal comment that it is a really, really dumb idea. The administration will put forth a slightly more refined answer in a letter that will also be going forward. We're also going to raise the peculiarity that Richard raised. I was in the federal government. I've gone through the rulemaking process many, many times. I have never seen the federal government exempt a state from a rule before they put out the rule for comment and passed the rule. How did you exempt Florida from a rule that you never published? If I was slightly cynical about this administration, I might suggest politics was at play. Luckily, I'm an optimist, so I'm sure it was just a typographical error that they made in the promulgation of the rule. But at the end of the day, it's very simple. The direction that the federal government is taking us is exactly wrong. And rather than lament our situation, do something about it. And that's the New York way. The New York way is to lead. And we're going to lead the way to a cleaner, brighter, smarter future. It's smart environmental policy, but it's also right as citizens and parents. The Native Americans have a great proverb that says it all. We did not inherit the land from our parents. We are borrowing it from our children. We are all public stewards of this gift we have been given, called planet Earth. And our obligation is to leave this planet better, cleaner, safer for our children than we found it. And we are going to do that in the state of New York, and we are going to lead the way for the nation in the state of New York. That I promise you. Now it's my pleasure to introduce a friend, a man who has been leading the charge on this issue literally all his professional life. For those of you too young to remember, Al Gore was the first person to speak about the dangers of the environment. And it's hard to go first, and it's hard to speak about a situation that has such possible negative ramifications when you are the only voice. And he did that. year after year after year, he did it. He did it as a senator. He did it in the Clinton-Gore administration. And it was a passion and a commitment and a sincere mission for the vice president. And I saw that myself time and time again. His leadership was educated and it was prophetic. In 2006, he released a documentary on climate change. I'm sure you all know, An Inconvenient Truth. The documentary got a lot of publicity. And there was a scene in the documentary that showed what could happen in a flood situation and showed parts of Manhattan getting flooded, and literally showed the 9/11 site getting flooded. And some people mocked the documentary and said, well, that's sensationalism. Those are scare tactics of the left. That could never happen. Hurricane Sandy hits. I'm governor of the state of New York. I'm in the Emergency Operations Center, and I dispatch everything, and it's just about the time when the water is really starting to come in. And I had been in the office all day, and I said, let me go out and take a ride around and see what's happening. This is in Manhattan. And one of the state police officers and I got in the car, and we started to drive around. We went east to 3rd Avenue, and the East River was broaching 3rd Avenue. We headed downtown, got to the foot of the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel. It was like surreal. I'm standing there alone. Nobody's in downtown Manhattan. There were no lights. There were no people. One other person walks up to me. The person happens to be Joe Lhota, who at that time is running the MTA, and who also went down to see firsthand the damage. And we're watching the water flood into the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel in a scene that you could not even conceive. I have the picture in my office still. The Hudson River had come up and had come over the west side of Manhattan and was filling the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel, which had actually fully flooded at one point. I then went to the 9/11 site, and it was vacant. It was myself and one trooper, and we had 2 flashlights. And we went into the Freedom Tower that was being built. And all you heard in the darkness was water rushing everywhere. And we went down into the foundation of the Freedom Tower. And the trooper who I was with said, we're alone, this is dangerous, we can't see anything, we don't know what's happening. But I said, all this water is coming in. 9/11 is built in a bathtub. The question to me was the bathtub breached so it was the water was coming in from underneath or from above? We walked several floors down in this construction site. It sounded like Niagara Falls with water coming everywhere. Eventually, the whole 9/11 site was flooded. The 9/11 museum was flooded. The Freedom Tower was flooded. And I remember being 5 stories down in the Freedom Tower, scared to death. And I remembered the picture from Inconvenient Truth, where Vice President Gore said, this is possible. And they mocked him. And there I was, alone in the reality of exactly what he had talked about. That night, cell phones, some were still working. My mother calls and says, your brother is in trouble. She doesn't ask about me. My brother, Chris, was a reporter at the time with CNN. He was on the other side, coincidentally, of the West Side Highway in Battery Park City. because he had gone to Battery Park City to watch the Hudson River rise. And I get him on the phone, and I said, I'm in the Freedom Tower. Just come across the West Side Highway, and I will meet you at the Freedom Tower. He said, I can't get across the West Side Highway. The water is 7 feet deep on the West Side Highway. Think about that, 7 feet deep on the West Side Highway. My brother's not the most athletic or coordinated individual. So I said to him, better you stay where you are. And he wound up spending the night standing on the top of a van. But that was the situation. Exactly what Vice President Gore had prophesized and was ridiculed for. He continued, he went forward, he did a sequel, An Inconvenient Truth, to continue to press for change. He has a climate reality project since 2011 that has driven 13,000 climate leaders to lead climate reality project chapters in 141 countries across the world. I was watching Al Gore on TV one night with my father. God rest his soul, we lost him 2 years ago. And my father was my hero. He was a very tough judge of politicians. He was suspect of them just by their choice of profession. And we're watching Vice President Gore on TV, and we're sitting on the couch, and I turned to my father and I said, you know, he is one brilliant fellow. And my father looked back at me and he said, yes, he is brilliant, but he's also courageous. And when you put brilliant and courageous together, then you have a special person. Ladies and gentlemen, a special person, Vice President Al Gore.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much. I just said to the governor that was way over the top, but thank you so much, Governor. And you know, I was thinking, you're talking about trying to see the future, and you were talking about your beloved great father and your mother Matilda, your daughters, your brother. I remembered a modified version of an old joke, and it's about the first Italian-American to be elected president of the United States. And he calls his mother and said, Mom, I want you to come to the inauguration. And she says, what will I wear? Who will I sit next to? I'm just not sure. I don't like to get out so much anymore. He said, look, I'll take care of it. We'll make sure you have a beautiful dress and coat, and you'll sit next to the Secretary of Defense. So they go through the ceremony, and the time comes for the oath, and he raises his hand, and his mother nudges the Secretary of Defense and says, you see that man standing there? And he says, yes. She says, his brother is an anchor on CNN. I'm gonna, let me acknowledge, I want to acknowledge Richard Kaufman for doing an outstanding job. And Richard, I consider myself something of an aficionado of environmental slideshows. That was really outstanding. And thank you for the work that you're doing. To all of the elected officials here, forgive me for not acknowledging everyone. I do want to single out my dear friend, Congressman Jerry Nadler, who's become a great leader in our country, and who knows what the future might hold. You know, we're a little over a year into this experiment with Trump. In science and in medicine, some experiments are terminated early for ethical reasons, and I don't know what the future could hold. But Jerry, you've been conducting yourself with great dignity and eloquence, and we all wish you well. To all of the environmental leaders here, I know my daughter Corinna was really embarrassed by the multiple references to her, so I'm gonna pile on here and acknowledge Corinna again. And to the advocates who were acknowledged by the governor, you know, along with the climate crisis and the ecological crisis, many have pointed to a democracy crisis in America. But I'm moved to say that here in New York, the home of Theodore Roosevelt, Franklin Roosevelt, Mario Cuomo, Andrew Cuomo, so many others, democracy is working here, and it's working because of the people of New York, because of the advocates, because of the grassroots activism. And when your governor listens and responds and then pleads with you to bring on more, that's the way democracy works as it is supposed to work. So thank you to the people of New York, and thank you, Governor. What you've just heard from Governor Cuomo is a magnificent demonstration of leadership on the environment. You might expect me in a circumstance like this to lay it on thick a little bit, but I want you to know that this is really and truly heartfelt. And what I'm about to say, I want you to really take to heart. He has done what I would dream every governor would do. And, you know, this is a tough political environment. I mean, I know a little bit about it. And I know that there are always issues that come up, and there's always the next fight. And because of the passionate advocacy from the people of this state, the work is not only never done, it always becomes more challenging. In this environment, what has emerged from the leadership of this governor and his outstanding team, and what has emerged from the interaction of that leadership with the passionate advocacy of the people in this state, is virtually unique and really and truly inspiring. Where the issue of climate is concerned, I mean, just think for a moment about the record. You heard a little bit about it, but a mandate of 50% electricity from renewables by 2030 is unprecedented. And a recognition that that's where the jobs of the future are going to come from. You know what the #1 job in the United States is today, and the fastest growing job? Solar technician. In fact, it's not only #1, not only growing faster than any other job, solar jobs are growing 17 times faster than the average of all other job growth in the United States. There are already twice as many solar jobs as in the entire coal industry. What's the second fastest growing job? Wind turbine technician. The job growth in efficiency, in the renewables industry, batteries, electric vehicles, these are the jobs of the future. And New York has always tried to anticipate these trends. And so many of our great industries have been born here because of this eye to the future. The past is receding, not quickly enough. But in my part of the country, my neighboring state of Kentucky is one of the, I'm from Tennessee, Kentucky is one of the largest coal-producing states in our country. You know, there's a famous coal museum in Kentucky. Some of you know what's happened there. They just installed solar panels all over their roof. And it was a smart decision because they're saving a lot of money in lower electricity bills for the coal museum. People who bet wrong on trying to extend the dirty and destructive fossil fuels of the past sometimes pay a price. I have great admiration for General Electric and for its leadership over the years. And I'm saddened that they recently made a very big bet on a promising future for fossil fuels. And tragically, they bet wrong. And this has been a calamity for that company and for many others that bet wrong. The companies and the leaders in the public and private sector who look at the future and see accurately what is going on are reaping benefits instead of trying to deal with the damaging mistakes of betting wrong on the future. You know, we are in the early stages of a sustainability revolution in this world. It has the magnitude of the Industrial Revolution, but it has the speed of the digital revolution. And it is transforming every sector of the market. It's based on the new digital tools of the Internet of Things and artificial intelligence and machine learning. It's based on innovative initiatives like the new Tesla factory that the governor brought here to New York State. We are seeing amazing advances. India has just announced that by law, within only 12 years, 100% of all their new cars and trucks will have to be electric vehicles. We are seeing in countries around the world, in the European Union, in the United States, in China, and in India, the four largest emitters, the vast majority of new electricity production capacity is from solar and wind. Coal is receding. Now gas is being outcompeted in the marketplace by electricity from renewables. Many are predicting that by the end of this calendar year, electricity from solar is going to be 1 cent per kilowatt hour. If you don't speak kilowatt hour, many here do, but if you don't speak kilowatt hour, that's like a quarter of the cost of electricity from burning fossil fuels. This is the future. We are seeing executive teams and CEOs acquire the ability to manage molecules and atoms and electrons with the same proficiency that's been used in the IT sector to manage bits of information. Google acquired this AI company, DeepMind. They said, look at our server farms. See if you can reduce the electricity. Same hardware, no changes to hardware, increased output of processed information, but they assigned the AI to look at all the knobs and levers and buttons and parameters of this, and they reduced energy consumption by 40%. Then as they learned to do it, instead of adjusting every 30 minutes, they adjusted every 5 minutes. Energy consumption is now down 56%. We're seeing similar advances everywhere as people see the danger of continuing to rely on fossil fuels for 80% of the world's energy, spewing 110 million tons of man-made global warming pollution into the atmosphere where it traps heat, treating the atmosphere as an open sewer. The accumulated amount now traps as much extra heat energy as would be released by 400,000 Hiroshima atomic bombs exploding every day on the Earth. It's a big planet, but that's a lot of energy. And it is completely disrupting the water cycle, completely disrupting the climate balance. Look what has happened just in the last few weeks. Temperatures in parts of the Arctic went above the freezing point in the middle of the dark, cold Arctic winter night. The sun's not even up yet. And that displaced the polar cell that always has kept that frozen air inside the area around the North Pole, so that it's forced out. It's spilling out down to the lower latitudes where we live. This is climate disruption, climate chaos. It has been predicted long since by the scientists. And by the way, these predictions, they don't come from me. They come from a careful hearing of the scientists who labor tirelessly as volunteers, by the way, in the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. They're truly heroic. We need to listen to them. Governor Cuomo has been listening to them. We saw Superstorm Sandy. Then we saw Hurricane Harvey. Hurricane Harvey, you mentioned Niagara Falls. Hurricane Harvey last year, imagine this. The full flow of Niagara Falls for 500 days was dumped into Harris County, Texas in 5 days. 1.5 meters of rain. In parts of Texas, it was a once in 500,000 year event. We've had 14 once in 1,000 year events in the United States in the last 7 years. You're not supposed to have a once in 1,000 year event every 6 months. Hurricane Irma devastated the Caribbean island nations, brushed Puerto Rico, devastated the Florida Keys, resulted in a once in 1,000 year rainfall in parts of Florida. Then Hurricane Maria. And the governor mentioned our fellow American citizens in Puerto Rico, many of whom still to this day have not recovered the electric power. This is a disgrace that the United States has left them in the lurch. What are we doing? And for some of those who've said over the years, oh, well, climate change, we'll just adapt to it. Oh, okay, adapt then. Start taking the steps. But in the meantime, let's prevent the far worse damage that is predicted if we do not act. Predictions, as I've mentioned, coming from the scientists, have come true. Should that not lead us to pay more careful attention to what they're predicting will come in the future if we do not act? This governor is acting. The utility regulation, very complicated concept. You can break your brain trying to figure out how to fix that, because it goes back more than 100 years to the days when the very first coal-burning generating plant was built by Thomas Edison here on Manhattan Island. And the regulation has grown up over all that time with the industry, and it was a blessing back in the day. These consequences were not anticipated and certainly not intended, but now they're here. So we have to figure out how to redo electric utility regulation. What a challenge. Ladies and gentlemen, there is one state among all 50 states that has figured out how to reform it in a way that helps the people, helps the industry, reduces emission, and lights the pathway to the future. And because of Governor Andrew Cuomo, New York State is leading the way on electricity regulation reform. It is a tremendous service to this country. He banned fracking in 2014. He skipped right over that, but that is a great advance. Phasing out coal by 2020, reaching the bipartisan agreement with the regional greenhouse gas initiative states last summer to go further and to go faster. More great leadership. Divesting the $200 billion state pension fund from fossil fuel holdings. More leadership from this governor. Founding the U.S. Climate Alliance, which represents nearly half of all U.S. Economic growth. This group of states is demonstrating that strong economic growth and the struggle to solve climate change, really these tasks go together. And all over the world, you see the state, provincial, and regional governments that have taken leadership on climate experiencing the strongest economic growth. This is now, it was demonstrated by California. I was in Ontario yesterday where Premier Kathleen Wynne has done the same thing. Quebec, the same thing. This is now a pattern, and New York, again, is leading the way. And thank goodness, because when President Trump announced last year that he wants the U.S. to pull out of the Paris Agreement, right away, Governor Andrew Cuomo, with some of his colleagues, other governors, stepped up and said, no, we're still in. Hundreds of cities, thousands of businesses. And as a result, the U.S. is well on track to not only meet but exceed the commitments we made under the Paris Agreement. And by the way, some people don't fully appreciate this fact, but the way the agreement was written, I was there, the first day upon which the U.S. can legally withdraw from the Paris Agreement happens to be the first day after the next presidential election. So, if there, and under the agreement, if there should be a new president, excuse me for a moment, then a new president could simply give 30 days notice and we're back in the agreement. This is, you know the old story about Horatio at the gate. This is really outstanding leadership. And of course, staving off the damage and protecting the people and farmers and businesses in this state is job number one for this governor, and he is doing that, charting the future course to take advantage of the new opportunities. He's doing that, and now today, on the last day of this comment period, I think they may hear your comment. I remember the old line, strong letter to follow. Literally, there will be a strong letter to follow your pithy and incisive direct comment from this podium. And of course, you know, we keep hearing that they can do these things safely, but the evidence shows they cannot. We were told the XL pipeline wouldn't, it's already spilled oil. We were told the Deepwater Horizon would be safe. We know the consequences. And there's so many of them. It just happens all the time. It's not safe. It is really, really dumb, as the governor eloquently said. And we should move in the direction that he has charted for us. The administration has been pushing for oil drilling everywhere, in national monuments, in public lands, virtually giving away the minerals that actually do belong to the people of this country, removing protections at the same time. So we have a very clear choice here. And my main message here, because the governor has taken the action here of submitting this comment, my main message is thank you, Governor Andrew Cuomo, for what you're doing here today, which is not unlike what you've been doing every day since you took the oath of office as governor of this state. And I do want to reemphasize the extraordinarily special nature of the climate leadership and the environmental leadership that this governor has been demonstrating in this office. I will close by saying that, again, the people of New York deserve the credit for creating and sustaining this political environment in which this kind of leadership is possible. Governor Cuomo deserves the credit for providing that leadership. And the record here in New York State demonstrates that we do have the capacity as a free self-governing people, if we bring our democracy back to life as you have done here, if we take the innovative steps to seize the amazing opportunities now available to us, and at the same time stave off the unthinkable catastrophe that the scientists have been warning us would occur were we not to act. We have the tools. We have the technologies. We have the public support. Some people question whether or not this country has the political will. What the people of New York State, and especially Governor Andrew Cuomo, has demonstrated is a lesson for the entire country, namely that political will is itself a renewable resource. Thank you very much, and thank you, Governor.
What else can I say? But thank you, Mr. Vice President. Thank you, Governor Cuomo. Together, we're standing up to the Trump administration's backward policies and fighting for a cleaner future. That concludes our program. I want to thank everyone for joining us today and for all the work that you do to protect our environment.